Now let us consider the Sefirot. Remember, the Sefirot are the vessels. That may be a new name you haven't written down. Vessels, or chalices, that make up the tree of life. Kabbalists have used many synonyms for the Sefirot, including lights, names, stages, crowns, mirrors, sources, and the inner faces of God. The inner faces of God. Rabbi Moses Luzzatto, an 18th century Kabbalist, thought of the Sefirot as transformers that decreased the intensity of the light of Ein Sof. He wrote, "The 10 Sefirot, emanations, act as veils." It's another name for Sefirot, veils. 10 stages, vessels, or degrees, which the Creator issued to serve as channels through which His bounty might be transmitted to man, restraining that bounty to the extent that the worlds shall not disappear because of the too great abundance of light, yet providing a sufficient amount of it to ensure their continued existence. He therefore made 10 vessels in order that the bounty in traversing them would become so densified that the lower creations could bear it. This is precisely the teaching of the Ascended Masters, which I have taught for 30 years, without the knowledge of the Kabbalah. The Blessed Ascended Master El Morya, blessed be his name, showed me the 12 hierarchies of the sun and described them to me as step-down transformers. He said their function is to step down the intensity of the light of the great central sun for the lesser evolutions in the far-flung worlds, that they might drink of the cosmic communion cup without being consumed by the unmitigated light of the sun. Some Kabbalists conceived of the Sefirot as vessels or instruments through which Ein Sof acts. This is a fact. Other Kabbalists thought of the Sefirot as the essence of Ein Sof. This too is fact. According to David Ariel, they adopted this position in order to avoid suggesting that we pray to Sefirot that are different than God. Moses Cordovero thought the Sefirot were God's essence and God's instruments at the same time. You can see that many individuals, many mystics, have put a lot of attention on the Sefirot to define and refine their own conception and hence receptivity to these 10 focuses of God. The first Sefirah, remember this is the singular noun for Sefirot, is called Keter. It's spelled K-E-T-E-R, pronounced Keter. It means crown. As you can see on the slide, Keter is the highest Sefirah on the tree of life. Keter is co-eternal with and identical or nearly identical to Ein Sof. Like Ein Sof, Keter was conceived of as nothing, even as it was conceived of as will. Some Kabbalists said that Keter cannot be known because of its proximity to Ein Sof. According to a 13th century Kabbalistic text, supernal Keter is a world hidden unto itself. David Ariel writes, Keter is the more active representation of God's will. It cannot be known except during the rare moment when God chose to reveal himself as Eya, Asher, Eya. How many know what that means? Eya, Asher, Eya. Say it with me. Eya, Asher, Eya. Eya, Asher, Eya. Eya, Asher, Eya. It just makes you smile from ear to ear the more you say it. It means I am that I am. I am who I am. I am that I am. I am what I am. I am that I am. I am who I am. I am what I am. In the Zohar, the manifestation of the infinite will is Keter. And that will in Keter is called the Holy Ancient One. According to Rabbi Green, Keter is the catalyst of all being, but not yet a thing in itself. Kabbalistic history is filled with ongoing debate as to the nature of Keter and its relationship to Ein Sof. This debate, says Rabbi Green, is in some ways reminiscent of the arguments about the eternity of the second person in early Christianity. This seems to be the Zohar's position. Keter is eternally present within Ein Sof, but is not to be identified with it. You can figure that one out. There is a correlation between the tree of life and the chart of your divine self. As you see on the screen, Keter, the crown, correlates to the I Am presence. I have instructed our artists, according to Almoria's instruction, of the placement of the tree of life of the Kabbalah over the tree of life of the chart of the I Am presence. So I will explain to you the relationship of each of the 10 as we proceed. All emanation flows from Keter to the other Sefirot. There were various explanations for how that occurred. Most Kabbalists saw emanation as a process of overflow from Ein Sof, which by nature is effulgent. When the essence of Ein Sof overflowed and expanded outward, the chalices of the Sefirot were there to receive it. Can't you see all these wonderful chalices in a great fountain in Rome where the waters are coming down and they go into the first Sefirot and then the next levels and the next levels, and the fountains keep going. I'm sure you've all seen a fountain like that, and I think we all have the memory of having seen such fountains on Atlantis. And for me, that is their symbology, the transfer of the light of the I Am that I am. When the essence of Ein Sof overflowed and expanded outward, the chalices of the Sefirot were there to receive it. A 13th century Kabbalistic text said, Keter receives from the root, and now you know that the root is Ein Sof, without any interruption, in a subtle whisper. It emanates and pours forth from its reservoir upon the other crowns or Sefirot, which are always close to its emanation. The Zohar described emanation proceeding from a complex pattern of interaction between Ein Sof and Keter. You might say that Ein Sof is the sun behind the sun of your mighty I Am presence. David Ariel explains, Ein Sof emanates its essence upon Keter and activates it. Without Ein Sof, Keter, or the I Am presence, wouldn't be activated. Keter, in turn, turns back to Ein Sof to draw down further essence, thereby linking them together. So Ein Sof gives to Keter, then Keter reflects back to Ein Sof. So this is forming a linkage. Likewise, we form our linkage to God. God gives to us, we give back to Him. Now this is very interesting. Listen closely. As Keter turns back to reflect its light toward Ein Sof, its source, it strikes a barrier, a curtain. Why? Because Keter is of a lower vibration than Ein Sof. So it cannot cross that barrier like the veil that hung between the Holy of Holies of the high priest and the outer court. So Keter cannot get back inside of Ein Sof. It strikes a barrier, a curtain, that stands between it now and Ein Sof. The barrier then reflects the light of Keter back to it. Did you get that? And creates the second Sefirah. Ein Sof gives light to Keter, Keter gives it back to Ein Sof, strikes the curtain throws it back and creates a new Sefirah. The process of emanation and reflection creates the 10 Sefirot. Keter is the means by which the infinite God makes all other creations possible. It is the transition between God's infinity and the finite world. Now I will give you the names for the 9 Sefirot. Those of you who can see a screen will see the names written. This is how they are pronounced. These 9 Sefirot emanate from Keter. Chokhmah, wisdom. Binah, understanding. Chesed, love. Gevurah, power. Tiferet, beauty. Netzach, triumph. Hod, majesty. Yesod, foundation. And Malchut, kingdom. Malchut is also known as Shekinah, Shekinah, or the presence of God. Chokhmah, Chokhmah, wisdom, is the second Sefirah. As you can see, it is the highest Sefirah on the right-hand side of the tree. Keter, you recall, is nothing. Chokhmah is the first or primal point of creation. This is the point from which the Big Bang exploded. It came into manifestation through an act of will by Ein Sof and who? Keter, right. Kabbalists call this point beginning because Keter, which is eternal, has no beginning. According to Zohar, beginning is the first command or utterance. As Charles Ponce explains, that means that beginning is the first word of creation. Chokhmah is also called being. It contains the blueprint and all the archetypes of creation. Rabbi Arthur Green explains, everything that is ever to be already exists in that infinitesimal point as it emerges within God. You could say that of the scientist's Big Bang theory. Everything that was to come into being existed in that single point of light just before it exploded. As the first defined being, Chokhmah becomes the source of all further being. Chokhmah itself is the archetype of masculine generative activity and is often called Abba, or Father. Thus Chokhmah, or God's wisdom, is the father of all creation. According to the Zohar, as soon as Chokhmah, the primal point, came into manifestation, it was surrounded by great light. The light expanded into a circle, which they call a palace, which formed the third Sefirah, Binah. As you can see on the screen, Binah is the upper Sefirah on the left-hand column of the tree. Binah is usually translated as understanding. Like some Hebrew words, Binah does not translate easily into English. In addition to understanding, Binah can also be translated as intelligence, insight, and discernment. The real meaning of the Hebrew word Binah lies within this cluster of English words. In the same way that Chokhmah is masculine and active, Binah is feminine and receptive. While Chokhmah is called father, Binah is called Ima, or mother. She is the divine or supernal mother in a passage describing the process of creation within Ein Sof prior to manifestation. The Zohar described Binah as a spring. From deep within the flame there flowed a spring, out of which the colors were drawn below. From the spring will bubble forth in an unending creative stream the 7 remaining Sefirot and all the lower worlds. But Binah does not act alone. Chokhmah and Binah are the original parents, our Father, Mother, God. Together they create the 7 lower Sefirot, and then all creation, animate and inanimate. According to the Zohar, Chokhmah's seed, or a point of light, entered Binah's palace or womb. There followed a cosmic conception that the Zohar depicted as an explosion of light. You couldn't have done a better job in paralleling this to the Big Bang theory of creation if you had actually followed the scientists' theories as you were writing it. As soon as the seed enters the palace filled up with light, from that light are poured forth other lights, sparks flying through the gates and giving life to all. End of quote. Binah is not only the womb of the great mother from which all creation came forth, she is also the return. As conceived of in the Zohar, Binah is the loving one to whom all will return at the end of time. For one 11th century Kabbalist, the name of God associated with Chokhmah as Yah means the eternal. Yah is made up of the Hebrew letters Yud and He. It is an abbreviation of the sacred name of God, or the Tetragrammaton, Yud, He, Vav, He. Yud is a masculine letter and denotes wisdom. He denotes the feminine principle, understanding. So your father is wise, your mother is understanding. According to Rabbi Arya Kaplan, the reason why this name as a whole is used to designate wisdom is because wisdom cannot be grasped except when it is clothed in understanding. So your mother teaches you the wisdom of your father. She gives you the understanding of your father and his wisdom. The name of God associated with Binah is Yud, He, Vav, He. Usually Yud, He, Vav, He is pronounced Adonai, meaning Lord. When associated with Binah, it is pronounced Elohim, Elohim. According to Rabbi Green, the earliest Kabbalists were fascinated with questions of the divine name, and mystic lore assigned each of the biblical names or terms for God to one of the Sefirot. This allowed for a rather easy key to Kabbalistic exegesis. So the Kabbalists would speak on the subjects of God contained in the scriptures based on their understanding of these 10 terms. Thereby the name of God employed in a verse would tell the reader which Sefirah was its secret subject. In this context, the name Elohim, Elohim, the generic term for God in Hebrew, was attached to Binah. Since this is the word used in the opening verse of Genesis, listen to this now. The Zohar offers a radical new twist to that verse. Remember, in the beginning God created. God is now the object rather than the subject of the verse. Genesis 1:1 is here taken to mean, through Chokhmah, he or it, a hidden subject, created God. In other words, according to the Zohar, the first 3 words of Genesis, Bereshit bara Elohim, which translate in the beginning God created, actually mean, by the means of the Sefirah called beginning, that is Chokhmah, Ein Sof created the Sefirah called Binah, or Elohim. Some Kabbalists simply take the first 3 words of Genesis to mean, in the beginning, Ein Sof created Elohim. Of course, we call that Elohim. It is an astounding, realization in the Lord God of gods. The Lord God of gods, as Joshua called him in Joshua 22:22. That's a very interesting number combination. Most of you know the Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters. And this is Joshua's exclamation in the book of Joshua, chapter 22, verse 22. He got the conception of God as the Lord God of gods. The Lord God of gods. In other words, in these Sefirot, we see that God becomes God, becomes God, becomes God by a different name and vibration. Kabbalists conceived of many possible groupings of the Sefirot within the tree of life. One of the most important was the division of the Sefirot into 3 columns. The right-hand column of the tree is made up of Chokhmah, Chesed, and Netzach. The Sefirot in this column have a masculine or positive polarity. The left-hand column is made up of Binah, Gevurah, and Hod. The Sefirot in this column have a female or negative polarity. The central column is made up of Keter. Keter at the top, Tiferet at the center, Yesod, and Malchut. For reasons that will soon be apparent, the column on the right is called the pillar of mercy. The column on the left is the pillar of judgment, and the center column is the pillar of compassion. According to some Kabbalists, mercy, justice, and compassion were the pillars by which God governed the world. Moses Luzzatto wrote, "There is not a light emitted by the emanator which is not inclusive of mercy, judgment, and compassion. These lights issue neither separately nor individually. Instead, they emerge from the 3 pillars already intermingled." It is this fusion of the principles of judgment, mercy, and compassion that supervises the governing of the world. Kabbalists also recognize that the Sefirot form 3 triads, each of which has a unique mode of expression. The first triad is made up of Keter, Chokhmah, and Binah. According to David Ariel, this triad represents 1. God's pure mind, 2. His act of thinking, and 3. the object of his thought, which is his own infinity. Keter, the pure mind, Chokhmah, his act of thinking, and Binah, the object of his thought, his own infinity. It is the most important of the 3 triads, as Charles Ponce explains. It symbolizes the dynamic function of a thought process anterior to the world, and is therefore an archetypal model. It represents, in other words, the thought process of God. God has a thought process, and he's thinking through you now. And his process is the manifestation of the pure mind, the act of thinking, and the object of the act of thinking. This first triad of Keter, Chokhmah, and Binah is related to the I Am presence. I am that I am, and Father, Mother. The first triad gives birth to the second triad of Ein Sof's ethical perfection and moral power. Now you see on the screen this triad formed by Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet. Chesed is the 4th Sefirah. Chesed, like Binah, does not easily translate into English. It is usually translated as love or mercy, but it can also be translated as grace or loving kindness. The 4th Sefirah is sometimes called Gedula, or greatness, instead of Chesed. Chesed is located in the center of the pillar that bears its name, the pillar of mercy. The 5th Sefirah is Gevurah. Gevurah means strength severity or power. This Sefirah is frequently called Din, spelled D-I-N, meaning judgment or justice. Although some Kabbalists use the title Gevurah and others Din, the fifth Sefirah combines the attributes of both. Gevurah is also located in the center of the pillar that bears its name, the pillar of judgment. Chesed and Gevurah function as a complementary pair. They represent the extremes of mercy and love on the one hand, and severity and judgment on the other. They balance and hold each other in check. Daniel Matt of the Center for Judaic Studies at the Graduate Theological Union says, Chesed and Gevurah are two sides of the divine personality, free-flowing love and strict judgment, grace and limitation. Ideally, a balance is achieved, symbolized by the central Sefirah, Tiferet. However, if judgment is not softened by love, Din lashes out and threatens to destroy life. Chesed's tendency is to emanate and expand Ein Sof's essence without limit. Gevurah presents the opposite force, the power to limit God's goodness by limiting Chesed's expansion. According to Charles Ponce, Gevurah, the power of God, is the Sefirah of justice and control, capable of meting out punishment. Its nature is feminine, and it limits the abundance of mercy. Judgment tempers mercy, and mercy tempers judgment. By the same token, the severities of power are tempered by mercy, so the two exist in a state of equilibrium, of harmony. This Sefirah is representative of the contraction of the divine will, because mercy is a life-giving power, ever productive in its activity. It would have been unwise to have let it express itself without setting some limit. It was for the reason that Gevurah, judgment and power or justice, holds things in check, that Gevurah had to be created. Yet without the compassion and creativity of mercy, justice in its role of the stern judge would cause things to contract to the point of non-existence. The fourth Sefirah's danger is to be found in its tendency to overexpand, the fifth in contraction. The two together create a middle point. The marriage of Chesed and Gevurah gives birth to beauty, which is expressive of all that is harmoniously balanced. They give birth to Tiferet. I would like to point out to you that Gevurah is on the feminine side. Justice and judgment are the feminine. Mercy is the masculine. Often then, it is our mothers who deal out the spankings and the punishments and the judgments, and our fathers who indulge us. Mothers are always wishing that fathers would do the job, but they seem to wind up doing it since they're home all the time with the children. So mothers, accept your role as Gevurah, and do not be too constrictive with your children, lest you destroy them by your judgments. Fathers, do not be too merciful, lest you spoil them altogether, and they find no balance and no entering into this figure of the Son of God, Tiferet. Tiferet.
You're watching Elizabeth Clare Prophet, world-renowned author and founder of Summit University. Summit University is located at the beautiful Royal Teton Ranch in Park County, Montana, just north of Yellowstone National Park. If you'd like more information, call 800-323-5228. That's 800-323-5228.
Tiferet is beauty or adornment. This is what we think of when we think of the Son of God, the great beauty. Beauty meaning more than physical appearance. It's just the beautiful manifestation of the most wondrous God in His Son. Tiferet is located in the center of the pillar of compassion. The pillar takes its name from rahamim, or compassion, the alternate title for Tiferet. The central pillar unites the pillars on the right and the left, and Tiferet harmonizes, conciliates, and unites the polar influences of mercy and judgment. This is another reason why Jesus said, referring to the universal God in all of us, "Without me, you can do nothing." Without that living Christ, there is no compromise, there is no resolution. This Son of God is available to all. We see the great tragedy of non-resolution, where the Christ, the Son of God, is not made the Lord of all. We see it in Yugoslavia today, with a tremendous slaughter that is simply unconscionable, unimaginable. We see it in the Middle East, where it has been for thousands of years, of the warfare of the opposing sons of Abraham, Isaac and Ishmael. Unless you come to the point of Tiferet, you will not have the balance of judgment and mercy. We need to recognize that in ourselves, totally inside of ourselves. All the Sefirot are unique, but Tiferet is especially so. Tiferet is the son of Chokhmah and Binah. He is the great mediator, the Son of God. There are several passages in the Zohar which establish this relationship. One reads, "The Blessed Holy One has one son who shines from one end of the world to the other. He is a great and mighty tree whose head reaches toward heaven and whose roots are rooted in the holy ground." The words mighty tree are a Kabbalistic reference to Tiferet, which is the trunk of the tree of life. Another passage in the Zohar said that the name of the Son of God is both Yud-He Vav-He and Yisrael. Yisrael. It reads, "Israel is his name, as it is written, my firstborn son, Israel. All the keys of faith hang from Israel." According to Daniel Matt, Israel in this passage is not earthly Israel, but its divine archetype, the central Sefirah, called Beauty of Israel. In other words, this passage refers to Tiferet. So we see that the Son is not only the Son, but the entire community of Israel, which is intended to mean as a word all of the sons and daughters of God, the light bearers of cosmos, worlds without end. And Israel simply means all who are real, partake of the body of God, the mystical body of God, which is the body of the universal Son. And we are all cells in that body of the living Christ. In these passages, the Zohar was endorsing neither Christianity nor Jesus. Matt points out that the Zohar never mentions Jesus by name, but rather makes it quite clear that the Jews do not need him. Instead, Rabbi Moses de Leon, the Zohar's author, takes the position that all Jews are sons of God. Matt goes on to say that nevertheless, the use of such language and imagery by a Jewish mystic in Christian Spain is remarkable. The author of the Zohar is translating Christological formulations into the language of Kabbalistic myth. Now you can see on the screen, Tiferet, the Son of God, is the Holy Christ self. To me, there is a very fundamental and simple misunderstanding between the Jewish mystic and the Christian mystic. And it is very simply dispensed with. And if it could be understood and accepted, there would no longer be a barrier between Christian and Jew. We have just read the Jew's concept that every Jew is a son of God. Implicit in that concept is that he has that Tiferet, that point of sonship within him. So why does he need this Jesus whom Christians say is the exclusive Son of God, the Word incarnate, and there is no other Son of God, no one else can be the Son of God, and you can only be saved through this particular Son of God, Jesus Christ. This is a flesh and blood, idolatrous concept. When you realize that the seed of the Son of God is in all, and that the Jews know that they have the seed of God in them, they simply cannot put together the pieces of a Christian doctrine which Jesus Christ, of course, never taught. So if you say to the Jew, which we all would say, why, of course you are a son of God. And the same Christ, or the same Son that is in you, is in me, and is the potential of God-identified being in all who have come forth from the heart of God. If this explanation could be given, what is there left to argue about? To me, the only Jewish exception to Jesus Christ is Christian doctrine and dogma. I also think that the next stumbling block for Jews regarding Christianity is what Christian doctrine and dogma and those who are not of the light but fallen angels who became part of the church put upon the people. And therefore Christians have persecuted Jews for 2,000 years. To me, that's almost a greater stumbling block than the doctrine and dogma itself. And so the Jew can rightly say, look at what Christianity has done to us. Of course, that's quite a generalization, but you know the history of this 2,000 years. So, one of the cardinal principles of Kabbalah is that the universe is composed of opposing forces. These forces are rooted in the Sefirot, particularly the polar Sefirot of Chesed and Gevurah. As we have seen, the extremes of mercy and judgment are brought into harmony in Tiferet. But Tiferet, in its role as mediator, is also the point of harmony between all the Sefirot. As David Ariel points out, because of its pivotal role as harmonizer of the various opposing tendencies, Tiferet is regarded as the axis and stable center of the Sefirot. Tiferet has many names. It has been called Heaven, Son, and King. So we call Jesus the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It has also been called the Blessed Holy One, which is the standard rabbinic name for God. According to David Ariel, Tiferet was understood to be the subject of many traditional prayers. It came to symbolize the aspect of God that was known as the traditional God of Judaism, the God of the Hebrew Bible. The name of God Kabbalists associated with Tiferet was Yud-He Vav-He. Rabbi Joseph Jekatilia, author of Gates of Light, an important 13th century text, said, "The great, glorious, fearsome name, Yud-He Vav-He, is a name that included all the other divine names that are mentioned in the Torah. Thus, when you call to your mighty I Am presence, you are accessing through that I Am that I Am, through the many light rays that converge in the center, all of the names of God in the Torah." In Gates of Light, Rabbi Jekatilia noted that light emanated from Keter, the crown, and flowed to Tiferet, the sun, to Malchut, or Shekinah, the feminine aspect of God, straight down the center. Referring to the names of God associated with these Sefirot, Rabbi Jekatilia said, it is from the name Eya, or I Am, the name associated with Keter, that all kinds of sustenance emanates, coming from the source, which is the infinite Ein Sof. It then proceeds through a series of steps until it reaches the blessed name Yud-He Vav-He. From the name Yud-He Vav-He, all spiritual channels flow. The flux is transmitted to the name Adonai, which means Lord. It is the name associated with Malchut. The name Adonai is therefore the storehouse containing all of the king's devices, and it is the essence that distributes these to all the creation through Malchut. It nourishes and sustains all things through the power of Yud-He Vav-He that is in it. Now the third triad consists of Netzah, Hod, and Yesod. According to Gershom Scholem, many Kabbalists saw the first triad as the realm of intellect, the second as the realm of the soul, and the third as the realm of nature. David Ariel says that the third triad represents the agents of God's governance and providential guidance of the world. In other words, entering into our lower selves, the lower figure in the chart. That's the third triad. Charles Ponce says that it represents the material universe in its multiplicity of forms. Kabbalists wrote a great deal about Ein Sof, the unknowable God, and about a number of the Sefirot, including Keter, Chokhmah, and Binah. But they wrote very little about Netzah and Hod. Netzah means triumph or victory. You'd think they could write all day about triumph and victory, wouldn't you? It's the lowest Sefirah on the pillar of mercy. Netzah is sometimes translated as endurance. Jesus said, "He that endures to the end shall receive the crown of everlasting life." Endurance is a very important point, and there you see it as Netzah on the right side. Hod means majesty or splendor. It is the lowest Sefirah on the pillar of judgment. Kabbalists thought of these two Sefirot as lower manifestations of Chesed, mercy, and Gevurah, judgment. They describe them as the instruments through which God governs the world. Netzah and Hod were also thought of as the source of prophecy. Yesod, foundation, is the ninth Sefirah. Yesod, right between Tiferet and Malchut, between the mother and the son. Some Kabbalists called it Yesod Olam. Yesod Olam, the foundation of the world. Daniel Matt explains, Yesod represents the procreative life force of the universe. He is also called Tzaddik, righteous one. And Proverbs 10:25 is applied to him. The righteous one is the foundation of the world. You can see that those who wrote the scriptures were writing very specific teachings and keys that could only be understood by those to whom the keys were given. Yesod is the axis mundi, the cosmic pillar. The light and power of the preceding Sefirot are channeled through him to the last Sefirah, Malchut. The first 9 Sefirot, divided into 3 triads, form a blueprint for all existence. Malchut, kingdom, is the 10th Sefirah. It is located at the base of the pillar of compassion. Malchut relates to the lower figure in the chart. If Malchut, or shall we say God as Malchut, had not descended to that level, to the very base of the spine as the mother chakra, we could not have taken incarnation and have the potential for God realization. This is the tremendous mercy of God to allow the Divine Mother to descend to that level. And so her wellspring is springing up within us continually. According to Gershom Scholem, the term kingdom refers to God's dominion or power in the world. As I said earlier, Malchut receives and absorbs the qualities of the other Sefirot. It is the vessel through which the others act. It reflects all aspects of divinity. As all aspects come from Keter, so all aspects are reflected back into the world and to Keter through the Divine Mother. According to Gershom Scholem, God reaches his complete individuation through his manifestation in Malchut. Here he is called I. This conception is summed up in the common statement that through the process of emanation, nothingness, Keter, changes into I, personhood. We go from the impersonal impersonality of God, as Saint Germain charted this, at the very top on the north side, to the personal personality. Keter, the absolute impersonal. Malchut, the absolute personal. Kabbalists recognize that the three letters which make up Ayin, the Hebrew word for nothingness, also form Ani, the Hebrew word for I. Kabbalists used to play on words to express the idea that the process of emanation began with a primal nothingness, or Ayin. They saw the Ayin unfold. That's spelled A-Y-N, but it is pronounced Ayin. They saw the Ayin unfold step by step to the Sefirot until it became the divine ego, or I, or Ani, in Malchut. Malchut is known as the daughter of the king. She is the bride, the mother, and she is the entire community of Yisrael. As I was saying, the entire body of God. This mother manifests through the whole body of God of the cosmos. Mother is community. As I said earlier, Malchut is also known as Shekinah. Shekinah, the feminine aspect of God. Shekinah is the most accessible aspect of God's being. She is also the door through which man must pass to reach the other Sefirot. Only then can he begin the ascent up the ladder of perception of the divine mystery, as Gershom Scholem put it. It is the flaming cherubim who keep the way of this tree of life at the door of Malchut. Malchut is the means whereby we enter, because we are in the lowliest state of the flesh. We cannot begin our exercises of meditation with Keter. We have to work through from the bottom and go back to God by these 10 steps. And the mystics took their entire lifetimes and many lifetimes to embody the qualities of each of these Sefirot. So the mighty I Am present, surrounded by the causal body of 7 concentric spheres. These spheres are actually the Sefirot. Every one of those spheres from the center outward are the 10 Sefirot, and some of them combine. So we have Keter in the center, then we have the Father, Mother in the next ring, and so on. Keter is the center of the causal body, moving out from the center. Chokhmah, wisdom, and Binah, understanding, together form the yellow sphere. Chesed, love, and Gevurah, judgment, make up the pink sphere. Tiferet, beauty, is the violet sphere. And incidentally, the violet flame is the great leveler, normalizer, transmuter, the balancer, the one that brings all things into harmony. Netzah, victory, and Hod, splendor, form the purple sphere. Yesod, foundation, is the green sphere. And Malchut, kingdom, is the blue sphere. Before we go any further, let us consider how Kabbalists dealt with the problem of evil. You are going to find this one of the most amazing teachings on how did evil begin that you have ever heard anywhere in any teaching. Kabbalists were well aware of evil forces. Both popular Judaism and rabbinic literature talked about demons and evil spirits. The rabbinic literature also talked about Satan and its counterpart in man, the, quote, evil urge in each individual that entices him to sin. Kabbalists wrote at length about fallen angels, demons, and forces of evil that collectively formed the, quote, other side. Yet one of the cardinal principles of Kabbalah is that everything ultimately has roots in Ein Sof. How then did Kabbalists account for the presence of evil in the universe? Listen well. There were different, often conflicting explanations. One of the most common was that evil emerged out of Gevurah, or Din. More precisely, many Kabbalists saw judgment untempered by mercy as the root of evil. Judgment. How El Morya insists that we refrain from criticism, condemnation, and judgment. This is why judgment untempered by mercy is the root of evil. So if you express judgment of another untempered by mercy, you are tying into the roots of evil. You are establishing ties to roots that are difficult to uproot. According to Rabbi Green, the Zohar explained the origin of evil by means of a myth. The dominant form this myth takes has to do with a necessary tension that exists as the fourth and fifth Sefirot, Chesed and Din, that is Gevurah, emerge from Binah. Din, the force of divine rigor or judgment, resents being tied to Hesed, the unmitigated flow of love. In the very moment of its emanation, it broke forth from the Sephirotic system, saying in the words of the Zohar, "I shall rule." This is the statement of Gevurah, who is also called Din, judgment. So you could say this is the original act of rebellion, when judgment says, "I want to be judgment and mete out judgment," without being forced to qualify that judgment with mercy. The measuring rod of the Sefirot used the power of Ein Sof to quickly force Din back into line, but in that moment of escape, some portion of its power was released that could not be retrieved. That portion of Din, now turned against God, began its own Sefirot emanation in mocking imitation of the divine world. The Zohar sees evil as originating in justice itself, when that justice is not tempered with compassionate, loving kindness. What did Jesus say? He said, "The Son of God came not into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might have eternal life." Thus, in Jesus Christ, the full manifestation of the tree of life, we see the force of compassion that has come to defeat the fanaticism, the anger, the hate and hate creation, and the judgment of the fallen angels who embody that gone astray Gevurah, that fallen Din. The force of Din within God has a legitimate role, punishing the wicked and setting out to limit the indiscriminate love flow of Chesed, which itself can be destructive if not held in proper balance. But once Din has escaped the demands of love, it is no longer to be trusted. Do not trust that man or woman or child who does not have that love, that all-compassionate love that can consume and bind judgment and yet hold the stern rod of discipline for the flowering of the soul. Judgment in our society is a fanaticism. It is racism. It is bigotry. It is misuse of the spoken word in the press. We see it everywhere, where people have power that they ought to use as divine justice, and yet they misqualify it as a grievous judgment that is condemnatory. There is an aspect of the compassionate Christ, which we call discrimination and discernment. Discrimination is knowing light from darkness, good from evil, discerning the spirits, knowing what is acting in a person. That comes from Tiferet, the all-knowing mind of God in the Son. Judgment, when it is perverted, comes from beneath and comes from that original rebellion.
more information on the mystical paths of the world's religions, call toll-free 1-800-323-5228. The preceding program was presented by Summit University, Box A, Livingston, Montana, 59047 1390. If you'd like to know more, call this number or write this address. For your free copy of Elizabeth Clare Prophet's best-selling book, The Human Aura, call this toll-free number, 1-800-323-5228. This is a limited-time offer, so call now for your free book. That's 1-800-323-5228.